Good evening, friends, and welcome to another night where the past whispers softly to us. Picture this: a fire crackles faintly, the wind hums through the trees, and you're wrapped in a blanket, ready to journey to a distant time. Tonight, we step into the heart of a Norse winter, where the ice clings to the earth and the stars burn with a cold, unyielding light. But we won't follow the warriors with their axes and shields. No, this story belongs to the women left behind, the wives of Vikings, whose struggles often fade into the shadows of history. So, settle in. Close your eyes if you wish, and let me take you to the forgotten world of a Viking warrior's wife, a woman strong, resilient, yet deeply human, facing a world that forgave no mistakes. If this is your first time here, or if you simply love these tales, subscribe to the channel to join us for more. Now, let the Nordic winds carry us into a winter-long past. The sun barely crested the hills, a pale disk struggling to pierce the thick fog that blanketed the fjord. Astrid woke to the cold nipping at her fingers, even beneath the furs piled high on her bed. The air in the longhouse was sharp, smelling of damp wood and the faint temps of smoke from the dying embers in the hearth. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of her children, Ira and Leif, curled together on their pallet nearby. The world outside was quiet, save for the distant howl of the wind weaving through the pines. It was a sound she knew well, a reminder of the long winter ahead, a season that tested the soul as much as the body. Astrid rose, her breath visible in the chill, and pulled a woolen shawl tight around her shoulders. Her hands, calloused from years of work, moved with practiced ease as she coaxed the hearth back to life. The fire sparked, casting a warm glow across the room, illuminating the woven tapestries that adorned the walls, scenes of ships and gods, stitched by her own hands during quieter nights. This was her domain, the heart of the home she had built with Bjorn, her husband, whose laughter once filled these walls but who now prepared for a journey that might steal him away for months, perhaps forever. The village of Hrafnafjord nestled in a narrow valley, its longhouses huddled together like sheep against the cold. Beyond the wooden palisade, the fjord stretched, its waters dark and still, reflecting the jagged peaks that loomed over the settlement. Astrid stepped outside, the frost crunching beneath her boots, and drew a deep breath. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint salt of the sea. She glanced at the sky, where gray clouds promised more snow. Winter in these lands was not just a season. It was a force, a relentless adversary that demanded preparation and respect. The day began as it always did, with purpose. She hauled water from the stream, its edges already rimmed with ice, and set it to warm over the fire. The children stirred, their small voices breaking the morning silence. Ira, barely 8, rubbed her eyes and asked for a story, while Leif, 2 years younger, clung to Astrid's skirts, his cheeks flushed from the cold. She smiled, brushing a lock of hair from Ira's face, and promised a tale later, one of Freya and her golden tears. For now, there was work to be done. The rhythm of Astrid's life was dictated by the needs of the household. She ground barley with a stone quern, the steady scrape of stone on stone a kind of meditation. The flour would become flatbread, dense and hearty, to sustain them through the day. She checked the stores in the corner of a longhouse, sacks of grain, dried fish, and a dwindling pile of turnips. The harvest had been meager, and with Bjorn's raid looming, Astrid knew the months ahead would demand every ounce of her ingenuity to keep hunger at bay. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to stretch a single fish into a meal for 5, and felt a pang of gratitude mixed with longing. Her mother was gone now, taken by a fever 3 winters past, but her lessons lived on in Astrid's hands. As the morning wore on, the village came alive. Smoke curled from the roofs of other longhouses, and voices carried across the yard, women calling to their children, men sharpening tools or repairing nets. Astrid exchanged greetings with Sigrid, her neighbor, whose sharp tongue hid a generous heart. Sigrid's husband, Torvald, would join Bjorn on the raid, and the 2 women shared a quiet understanding, their eyes meeting with a mix of resolve and unspoken fear. The men spoke of glory and treasure, but the women knew the truth. Every departure carried the weight of loss, the possibility that the sea would claim more than it gave. Astrid's hands never stopped moving. She mended a tear in Leif's tunic, the needle flashing in the firelight, and then turned to churning butter, her arms aching from the effort. The work was relentless, but there was a strange comfort in its predictability. Each task was a thread in the tapestry of her life, binding her to this place, to her children, to the hope that Bjorn would return. Yet, beneath the surface, a current of unease ran through her. The winters were growing harsher, the summers shorter. Whispers in the village spoke of poor omens, a raven circling the hall 3 times, a dream of a ship swallowed by waves. Astrid pushed the thoughts aside, but they lingered, like the cold that seeped through the walls. By midday, the sky had darkened and snow began to fall, soft flakes that clung to her hair as she stepped outside to tend the goats. The animals were restless, their breath steaming in the air as they nudged her for grain. She spoke to them softly, calling them by name: stubborn white-ear, little horners. She scattered feed. The goats were more than livestock. They were lifelines, their milk and meat a bulwark against starvation. Astrid's fingers brushed their coarse fur, and she felt a moment of peace, a connection to the life she was fighting to preserve. Back inside, she prepared a meal, slicing turnips and mixing them with dried herbs to mask their bitterness. The children sat close to the fire, their laughter a fleeting warmth in the cold room. Astrid watched them, her heart swelling with love and fear. Ira had her father's eyes, bright and curious, while Leif carried his stubborn streak. They were her reason to endure, to rise each morning despite the weight of uncertainty. She told them a story as they ate, her voice low and soothing, weaving a tale of a brave woman who outwitted a frost giant. The children listened, wide-eyed, their spoons forgotten in their hands. As evening fell, the longhouse grew quiet again. Astrid sat by the hearth, her hands idle for the first time all day. She stared into the flames, their dance casting shadows that seemed to flicker with memories. She thought of Bjorn, his broad shoulders, and the way his laughter could fill a room. He was a good man, fierce in battle but gentle with her, his calloused hands soft when they brushed her cheek. He had promised to return with silver and stories, but promises were fragile things in a world ruled by storms and swords. The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden shutters, and Astrid felt the weight of the coming days. Bjorn's departure, it was imminent, and with it, the true test of her strength would begin. She was no stranger to solitude. Every raid had left her alone before, but this winter felt different, heavier, as if the gods themselves were watching. She murmured a prayer to Freya, asking for protection, for warmth, for the courage to face what lay ahead. If you've been moved by Astrid's tale, subscribe if you liked the video. Join us to keep her legacy burning bright. As she banked the fire for the night, Astrid glanced at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful in the dim light. Tomorrow Bjorn would gather his men, the longship would be readied, and the village would hum with the tense anticipation of farewells. But for now the longhouse was hers, a small fortress against the cold. She pulled the furs over her shoulders and closed her eyes, the crackle of the fire blending with the wind's low song, carrying her into a dream of a warmer world. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 2. The Long Farewell. The fire still crackles softly in Astrid's longhouse, its warmth a fragile shield against the creeping cold of a Norse winter. Outside, the fjord lies still, its waters reflecting the grey dawn like a polished blade. Last we left her, Astrid was rising to meet the demands of her day, tending to her children, her goats, and the hearth that anchors her world. But now, the rhythm of her life is about to shift. Her husband Bjorn stands on the edge of departure, his longship ready to carry him across the sea to distant shores. Tonight we walk with Astrid through the weight of farewell, where love and fear intertwine, and the strength she's always carried is tested in ways no axe or shield can protect. So, settle in, let the wind's low song guide you, and let's step back into her story. The morning broke with a brittle edge, the air sharp enough to sting Astrid's cheeks as she stepped outside. The village of Hrafnafell buzzed with a tense energy, the kind that comes when men prepare to leave and women brace themselves to stay. Bjorn was already at the shore, his broad figure silhouetted against the fjord where the longship rocked gently on the tide. Its dragon-headed prow seemed to leer at the sky, hungry for the journey ahead. Astrid's heart tightened as she watched him, his hands busy with ropes and sails, his laughter mingling with the shouts of his men. He was in his element, a warrior born for the sea, but to her, he was the man who carved wooden horses for their children, who whispered promises in the dark. She turned back to the longhouse, her breath clouding in the cold. Inside, Ira and Leif were awake, their small faces pale with the knowledge of what today held. Ira clung to a small wooden figure Bjorn had made, her fingers tracing its worn edges. Leif, too young to fully understand, sensed the heaviness, and stayed close to Astrid, his hand tugging at her skirt. She knelt, pulling them both into her arms, their warmth a fleeting comfort. "Papa will bring you back treasures," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Stories of far-off lands, and maybe even a pearl from the sea." Ira's eyes brightened, but Leif only buried his face against her shoulder. The longhouse felt smaller today, its walls closing in with the weight of what was to come. Astrid busied herself with tasks, each one a tether to normalcy. She swept the floor, the broom's bristles scraping against the packed earth, and checked the fire, adding a log that sent sparks dancing upward. The scent of pine and smoke filled the air, grounding her. She packed Bjorn's provisions, dried fish, flatbread, a small jar of honey she'd saved from summer. Her hands moved with care, folding the food into a cloth, but her mind wandered to the nights they'd spent planning this raid, his voice full of fire as he spoke of silver and glory. She'd nodded, smiled, but inside, she'd counted the risks, storms, battles, the gods' fickle whims. Outside, the village pulsed with activity. Men hauled chests of weapons to the shore, their blades glinting in the weak sunlight. Women moved, among them, offering cloaks, food, or quiet words. Astrid joined them, carrying Bjorn's pack, her boots sinking into the frost-crusted earth. The snow from yesterday had stopped, leaving a thin blanket that crunched underfoot. She passed Sigurd, who was tying a charm of braided wool around Torvald's wrist, her face set in a mask of resolve. Their eyes met, and Astrid felt the unspoken bond between them, two women facing the same shadow. The same uncertainty dotted the shore. Bjorn turned as she approached, his face softening. He was tall, his hair braided tightly against his scalp, his beard flecked with early gray. "Astrid," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. He took the pack, his fingers brushing hers, warm despite the cold. For a moment, they stood there, the noise of the village fading. She wanted to say so much. "Come back to me, stay safe, don't let the sea take you," but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached up, adjusting the cloak around his shoulders, her hands lingering. "The winds favor you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "but the gods watch closely." He smiled, a crooked grin that had won her heart years ago. "I'll bring you a comb from across the sea," he promised, his hand cupping her cheek. "Something fine, for your hair." She nodded, her throat tight, and stepped back as he turned to his men, his voice rising in command. The longship was ready, its sails catching the wind, the oars poised like the wings of a great bird. Astrid stood with the other women, their faces a mix of pride and fear, as the men climbed aboard. Ira and Leif clung to her, their small hands gripping hers, and she felt the weight of their trust, their need for her to be their anchor. The drumbeat began, a steady rhythm that echoed across the fjord, signaling the ship's departure. Oars dipped into the water, pulling the longship forward, its prow cutting through the waves. Astrid watched, her heart pounding, as Bjorn raised a hand in farewell. She lifted her own in return, her fingers trembling. The ship grew smaller, swallowed by the mist that clung to the fjord, until it was just a shadow, then nothing at all. The village fell silent, the drumbeat gone, leaving only the wind and the lapping of waves. Astrid turned back to the longhouse, her steps heavy. The children trailed behind, their questions quiet now, as if they sensed the shift in her. Inside, the fire still burned, but its warmth seemed distant. She sat by the hearth, pulling Ira and Leif close, and began a story too. Their warrior tale of a hero who sailed beyond the stars and returned with the sun itself. Her voice was soft, soothing, but her mind was elsewhere, on the sea, on the man who carried her heart across its waves. The day passed in a blur of tasks. She milked the goats, their breath steaming in the cold, and checked the traps she'd set in the woods, finding a single hare, its fur dusted with snow. She prepared a simple meal, the scent of boiled turnips and herbs filling the longhouse, but her appetite was gone. The village felt emptier now, the absence of the men a palpable thing. Astrid overheard whispers among the women talk of past raids, of ships lost to storms or rival blades. She pushed the words away, focusing on the weight of the ladle in her hand, the warmth of the fire against her skin. Night fell, and the longhouse grew quiet. Astrid sat by the hearth, mending a tear in Bjorn's spare cloak, her needle moving with slow precision. The act was a kind of prayer, a hope that he'd need it again. The children slept, their breathing a soft counterpoint to the wind outside. She thought of the winters they'd faced together, the nights they'd laughed over a shared cup of mead, the mornings they'd woken to find the world buried in snow. Those memories were her strength, but they also sharpened the fear that gnawed at her, fear that this time, the sea might not give him back. She rose, adding a log to the fire, its crackle, a reminder of the life she must sustain. The longhouse was her fortress, her children her purpose. But the days ahead loomed like the mountains beyond the fjord, vast, unyielding. She thought of Freya, goddess of love and war, and whispered a prayer for Bjorn's safety, for the strength to carry on alone. The wind answered, a low moan that rattled the shutters, as if the gods themselves were listening as she lay down beside her children. Their warmth's a small comfort. Astrid felt the weight of the farewell settle into her bones. The longship was gone, but her work was just beginning. Tomorrow she would rise again, tend the hearth, and face the winter's trials. The village would look to her, and she would not falter, not yet. And so, Astrid's story carries on. In the next chapter, we'll walk with her through the brutal heart of winter, where survival demands more than strength, it demands cunning, heart, and the will to endure. Stay with us, friends, as the frost deepens and Astrid's resolve is tested. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 3. The weight of winter. The embers in Astrid's hearth glow faintly now, their warmth barely holding back the chill that seeps through the walls of her longhouse. The fjord outside lies silent, its waters hidden beneath a shroud of frost and mist. We left Astrid standing at the edge of farewell, watching Bjorn's longship vanish into the horizon, her children clinging to her as the village settled into an uneasy quiet. Now, the true test begins, not the fleeting pain of parting, but the long, grinding struggle of a Norse winter, where every day is a battle against cold, hunger, and the shadows of doubt. So, pull your blanket close, let the soft crackle of the fire guide you, and step with us into Astrid's world as she carries the weight of survival alone. The first true snow of the season came 3 days after Bjorn's departure, a heavy fall that buried the paths of Raftenfell and turned the world into a sea of white. Astrid woke to a stillness so profound it felt like the gods had hushed the earth itself. The longhouse was cold, the air sharp with the scent of frost and pine. She rose, her breath clouding, and stirred the fire, coaxing it back to life with kindling she'd gathered before the storm. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the woven tapestries, and she felt a pang of gratitude for the woodpile stacked against the wall. Enough, she hoped, to last the worst of the winter. Outside, the snow reached her knees, each step a labor as she trudged to the goat shed. The animals bleated, their breath steaming in the dim light, and Astrid scattered grain with care, her fingers numb despite the wool wrapped around them. The goat's stubborn white ear and little horn nuzzled her hands, their warmth a small comfort. She checked their water, breaking the thin ice that had formed overnight, and murmured soft words to them, as if they could understand her worries. The milk was thinner now, a sign of the lean months ahead, and she made a mental note to ration it carefully for Ira and Leaf. Back in the longhouse, the children were awake, their faces pale in the morning light. Ira sat by the hearth braiding a strip of leather, her small hands steady but her eyes distant. Leaf played with a wooden horse, galloping it across the floor, oblivious to the cold that crept through the cracks. Astrid knelt beside them, brushing snow from her cloak. "We'll make porridge today," she said, her voice warm to hide the tightness in her chest, "with a bit of honey, like Papa likes." Ira nodded, but Leaf's face crumpled. "When's Papa coming back?" he asked, his voice small. Astrid pulled him close, her heart aching. "When the ice melts and the fjord sings again," she said, hoping her words sounded surer than she felt. The days blurred into a rhythm of survival. Astrid's hands were never idle, grinding barley, mending clothes, tending the fire. The longhouse smelled of smoke and boiled roots, a faint warmth that clung to the air. She checked the stores daily, her fingers tracing the sacks of grain and dried fish, calculating how long they'd last. The harvest had been poor, and with Bjorn gone, there was no one to hunt or trade for extra provisions. She thought of her mother's tricks, mixing bark with flour to stretch the bread, boiling bones twice for broth, and felt a flicker of resolve. She would not let hunger win. The village was quieter now, the absence of the men a heavy presence. Astrid saw it in the faces of the other women: Sigrid, whose sharp wit had softened into weary silence; Ingrid, who sang to her baby to keep her own fears at bay. They met in the yard, sharing tasks and stories, their breath mingling in the cold air. Astrid helped Sigrid repair a fishing net, their fingers stiff as they wove the cords. "Torvald, better bring back something worth this cold," Sigrid muttered, but her eyes were soft, betraying her worry. Astrid nodded, her own thoughts on Bjorn, somewhere beyond the sea, where storms and swords waited. The cold was relentless, seeping into every corner of the longhouse. Astrid stuffed rags into the gaps between the planks, but the wind found its way in, rattling the shutters and chilling the floor. She wrapped Ira and Leaf in extra furs at night, their small bodies pressed against hers for warmth. Sleep came, fitfully, her dreams filled with images of crashing waves and empty shores. She woke once to a strange sound, a low groan, like the earth itself shifting. It was only the ice on the fjord cracking under its own weight, but it left her heart racing, a reminder of how fragile her world had become. One morning, the trap she'd set in the woods were empty, the snow around them untouched. Astrid stood in the forest, the pines towering above her, their branches heavy with white. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of her boots and the distant cry of a raven. She tightened her cloak, her breath shallow, and reset the traps. With trembling hands, hunger was a specter now, lurking in the corners of her mind. She thought of the stories her grandmother told, of winters so harsh that families ate their seed grain and prayed for mercy. Astrid refused to let that be her story. She would find a way. Back at the longhouse, she salvaged what she could. A handful of dried berries, a small fish from the stores, a few turnips that hadn't yet gone soft. She boiled them into a thin stew, adding herbs to mask the bitterness. The children ate eagerly, their spoons scraping the wooden bowls, and Astrid watched them, her own portion untouched. "Tell us about the giant again," Ira said, her eyes bright. Astrid smiled, her voice falling into the familiar cadence of storytelling. She spoke of a woman who tricked a frost giant with her wits, leading him into a trap of his own making. The children laughed, their faces glowing in the firelight, and for a moment, the weight of winter lifted, but the cold returned with the night, sharper now, as if the gods were testing her. The fire burned low, the woodpile shrinking faster than she'd hoped. Astrid sat by the hearth, her hands busy with a spindle, twisting wool into thread. The repetitive motion soothed her, a counterpoint to the storm brewing outside. The wind howled, shaking the longhouse, and she thought of Bjorn, out there in the vast, unforgiving sea. Was he warm? Was he safe? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the thread, the fire, the children sleeping nearby. Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. If you've been moved by Astrid's tale, subscribe if you liked the video. Join us to keep her legacy burning bright. The days stretched on, each one a mirror of the last. Astrid bartered with Sigrid for a small sack of oats, trading a woven belt she'd made last summer. She checked the traps again, finding a scrawny rabbit, its fur matted with snow. She skinned it with care, her knife steady, and added the meat to the pot, stretching it with roots and herbs. The village women gathered sometimes, sharing what little they had: a loaf of bread, a handful of dried apples, a story to lift their spirits. Astrid listened, her hands busy with mending, and felt a quiet strength in their company. They were all fighting the same battle, their hearts and hopes bound together. One night, as the snow fell thick and fast, Astrid sat with Ira and Leif, teaching them to carve simple runes into a piece of wood. Their small hands fumbled, but they laughed, their voices a warmth that rivaled the fire. She showed them the rune for strength, her finger tracing its sharp lines. "This is you," she told them, her voice soft, strong, like the oak that stands against the storm. Ira nodded solemnly, but Leif grinned, carving a crooked line that made them all laugh. In that moment, Astrid felt the weight of winter ease, if only a little. Yet, as she lay down that night, the cold returned, seeping into her bones. The longhouse creaked under the snow's weight, and the wind sang a mournful song. Astrid thought of the months ahead, the endless stretch of ice and hunger. She whispered a prayer to Freya, asking for endurance, for warmth, for Bjorn's safe return. The goddess's name felt heavy on her tongue, a reminder of the faith that both sustained and haunted her. The winter deepens, and Astrid's fight grows harder, but her spirit remains unbroken. In the next chapter, we'll step into her heart, where faith and doubt wrestle as she seeks signs from the gods, praying for Bjorn's safety while facing the omens that haunt her dreams. Stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story unfolds. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Gods. The snow continues to fall over Hrafnfell, blanketing Astrid's longhouse in a quiet that feels both sacred and heavy. The fire in her hearth burns low, its embers casting a soft glow as she fights to keep her family fed and warm through the brutal Norse winter. We left her last amidst the grind of survival, stretching meager stores and finding solace in the laughter of her children, Ira and Leif. But beneath her steady hands and resolute heart, a deeper struggle stirs, one of faith, doubt, and the unseen forces that shape her world. Tonight, we step into Astrid's soul, where she seeks the gods' guidance, wrestling with omens and the aching uncertainty of Bjorn's fate. So, draw your blanket close, let the fire's crackle soothe you, and walk with us as Astrid listens for whispers from the divine. The wind howled outside, a relentless wail that seemed to carry voices from beyond the fjord. Astrid sat by the hearth, her spindle idle for once, her hands folded in her lap. The longhouse was quiet, save for the soft breathing of Ira and Leif, asleep on their pallet, their faces peaceful in the dim light. The air smelled of smoke and damp wool, a familiar comfort. But tonight it did little to ease the restlessness in her chest. She stared into the fire, its flames dancing like the stories her grandmother once told of gods who walked among mortals, of Freya with her golden tears, of Odin's ravens watching from the skies. Astrid had always believed, had always trusted the gods to guide her path, but now, with Bjorn gone and winter tightening its grip, doubt crept in like frost through the walls. She rose, careful not to wake the children, and stepped to the small altar in the corner of the longhouse. It was a simple thing, a flat stone, draped with a cloth, adorned with a carved figure of Freya, its wood worn smooth by years of touch. Astrid knelt, her fingers brushing the figure, and whispered a prayer. "Great Freya, goddess of love and strength, watch over Bjorn. Guide his ship through storm and battle. Bring him home to us." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind's moan, but the words felt heavy, as if they carried the weight of her heart. She lit a small offering of dried herbs, their sharp scent rising with the smoke curling toward the roof. The act was a ritual, a tether to hope, but as the flames consumed the herbs, she wondered if the gods were truly listening. The village had always been steeped in signs and omens. A raven circling thrice meant death. A red dawn promised bloodshed. Astrid had grown up with these beliefs, learning to read the world as her mother had through the flight of birds, the shape of clouds, the rustle of leaves. But lately, the signs seemed muddled, contradictory. 2 days ago, she'd seen a fox dart across the snow, its eyes glinting like stars, and Sigrid had called it a blessing, a sign of cunning and survival. Yet that same night, Astrid had dreamed of a ship sinking beneath black waves, its sails torn like a widow's cloak. She woke with her heart pounding, the image lingering like a bruise. Was it a warning, a trick of her tired mind? She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at her, sharper than the cold. Morning brought no relief. The snow had piled higher, sealing the longhouse in a cocoon of white. Astrid bundled herself in furs and trudged outside, the air biting her cheeks. The village was hushed, the paths buried, and the fjord gleamed under a thin crust of ice. She checked the traps in the woods, her boots sinking deep, but found only snow and silence. The forest felt watchful, its pines standing like sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. She paused, her breath clouding, and scanned the sky for ravens, for any sign that might ease her mind. But the clouds were thick, gray, offering nothing but the promise of more snow. Back in the longhouse, she busied herself with tasks to quiet her thoughts. She ground barley, the quern's rhythmic scrape a kind of prayer, and mended a tear in Ira's cloak, her needle flashing in the firelight. The children played nearby, their voices a soft hum, Ira weaving a story about a magic cat, Leaf giggling as he stacked wooden blocks. Astrid smiled, but her mind wandered to the altar, to the gods who seemed so distant. She thought of her father, a man who'd sailed with Bjorn's father and never returned. Her mother had prayed then too, offering mead and woven charms, but the sea had kept him. Astrid pushed the memory away, focusing on the needle, the thread, the warmth of her children's laughter. The village women gathered that afternoon, their breath steaming as they worked together to clear snow from the paths. Astrid joined them, her shovel biting into the drifts, her arms aching but grateful for the shared labor. Sigrid was there, her sharp tongue softened by the cold, and Ingrid, cradling her baby beneath her cloak. They spoke of small things at SAP's children, the hope of an early spring, but, beneath the chatter, Astrid sensed their shared unease. Saw a raven this morning, Ingrid said quietly, her eyes on the snow. Flew low, toward the sea. The words hung heavy, and Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She wanted to dismiss it, to call it just a bird, but the dream of the sinking ship flashed in her mind, and she said nothing. That night, Astrid took the children to the village's sacred grove, a cluster of ancient oaks just beyond the palisade. The snow was lighter here, caught in the branches above, and the air smelled of earth and ice. She carried a small offering, a braid of wool and a handful of barley, all she could spare. The grove was quiet, the trees standing like guardians, their bark etched with runes from generations past. Astrid knelt at the base of the largest oak, the children beside her, and placed the offering in a hollow. Freya, hear us, she whispered, her voice trembling. Thor, lend your strength. Odin, guide our paths. Ira mimicked her small hands pressing into the snow, while Leif clutched his wooden horse, his eyes wide with wonder. As they walked back, the sky cleared for the first time in days, revealing a scattering of stars. Astrid paused, her gaze drawn to the heavens, searching for a sign. A single star burned brighter than the rest, pulsing like a heartbeat, and for a moment she felt a flicker of hope. Was it Freya's answer? A promise that Bjorn was safe? She held the thought close, like an ember against the cold, but doubt lingered, whispering of storms and broken ships. If you're finding solace in Astrid's journey, suscríbete si te gusta el video. Your support keeps these stories glowing, like stars in a winter sky. Back in the longhouse, Astrid stoked the fire, its warmth a fragile defense against the night. She told the children a story, her voice low and soothing, about Freya's golden necklace, forged by dwarves and bright enough to light the darkest paths. Ira listened, her eyes heavy, while Leif curled against her, already half asleep. The tale was as much for her as for them, a reminder of the goddess's power, her love, her fierce protection. But as the fire burned low, Astrid's thoughts turned to the omens again, the raven, the dream, the star. She wanted to believe they meant something, that the gods were watching, but the silence of the longhouse felt like an answer of its own. She rose, checking the stores once more, her fingers tracing the dwindling sacks of grain. The winter was far from over, and hunger loomed closer with each passing day. She thought of the grove, the offering, the star, and clung to the hope they offered, however faint. Tomorrow, she would rise again, tend the hearth, check the traps, and keep her family alive. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, whispering Bjorn's name into the dark, as if the gods might carry it to him. The wind outside grew quieter, a soft murmur now, and Astrid lay down beside her children, their warmth anchoring her. She closed her eyes, the fire's crackle blending with the memory of the star's light, and prayed for strength to face the days ahead. The gods might be silent, but her will was not. Astrid's faith holds her steady, but the winter's trials are far from over. In the next chapter, we'll walk with her through the village, where bonds with other women offer strength, but rivalries and secrets threaten to unravel the fragile unity of Hrafnifell. Stay with us, friends, as the story deepens. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 5. The village hearth. The fire in Astrid's longhouse flickers, its glow a faint comfort against the endless winter that grips Hrafnifell. The fjord lies frozen, the pines silent under their snowy burden. We left Astrid kneeling in the sacred grove, seeking signs from the gods, her heart torn between faith and doubt as she prays for Bjorn's safe return. Now, as the days grow shorter and the cold deepens, she turns to the women of the village, her allies, her confidants, and sometimes her rivals. Their shared struggles weave a fragile web of strength, but beneath the surface, tensions simmer, threatening to unravel the unity they all depend on. So, wrap yourself in the warmth of your blanket. Let the hearth's soft crackle guide you, and step with us into Astrid's world, where bonds are tested and the village heart beats strong. The snow fell lightly now, a soft dusting that clung to Astrid's cloak as she crossed the village yard. The longhouse door creaked shut behind her, muffling the sound of Ira and Leif's laughter as they played with their carved runes. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and the faint smoke rising from the chimneys of Hrafnifell. The village felt smaller in winter, its longhouses huddled close, their roofs heavy with snow. Astrid's boots crunched on the path, each step a reminder of the work that waited: wood to chop, traps to check, a family to feed. But today, she sought something more than survival, the company of the women who shared her burdens, whose voices and hands helped hold back the darkness. She headed toward Sigrid's longhouse, a sturdy structure at the edge of the yard, its walls adorned with carved ravens. Sigrid was outside, splitting logs with a steady swing of her axe, her breath steaming in the cold. Her sharp eyes softened as she saw Astrid approach. "You're out early," Sigrid said, resting the axe against a stump. "Cold's not bad. Enough to keep you inside." Astrid smiled, brushing snow from her hair. "If I stay by the fire too long, I'll forget how to move." They laughed, a quiet sound that carried across the yard, drawing a curious glance from Ingrid, who was sweeping snow from her doorstep, her baby bundled against her chest. The women of Hrafnfell were a tapestry of strength and struggle, each thread vital to the whole. Astrid had known them since childhood: Sigrid with her quick wit and quicker temper, Ingrid, gentle but fierce when it came to her child, and others like Freydis, whose sharp tongue could cut deeper than any blade. They gathered often, sharing tasks and stories, their hands busy with spinning, weaving, or mending. Today they met in Sigrid's longhouse, where the fire burned bright and the air smelled of warm bread and dried herbs. Astrid brought a small basket of flatbread, her contribution to the shared meal, and settled beside the hearth, her fingers warming against a wooden cup of barley tea. The conversation began lightly: talk of children, of recipes to stretch their dwindling stores. Ingrid spoke of her baby's first tooth, her voice soft with pride, while Sigrid grumbled about a goat that kept escaping its pen. Astrid listened, her hands working a spindle, the wool twisting into thread with a rhythm that calmed her. But, beneath the chatter, she sensed a current of tension. Freydis sat apart, her eyes narrowed as she stitched a cloak, her silence louder than words. Astrid knew why last week Freydis had argued with Sigrid over a borrowed axe, a small dispute that had grown into something deeper, a rift that threatened their fragile unity. Astrid tried to bridge the gap, offering Freydis a piece of a flatbread. "Made it with the last of the honey," she said, her voice warm. Freydis took it, her expression softening, but the air remained heavy. The women were bound by necessity, their survival tied to one another, but winter had a way of sharpening edges. Food was scarce, tempers short, and the absence of the men left a void that gossip and grudges could fill. Astrid felt it in the glances, the unspoken accusations: whose stores were fuller, whose husband might return with more silver, whose faith in the gods wavered. She thought of her mother, who had led these gatherings when Astrid was a girl, her voice a steady anchor. "We're stronger together," her mother used to say, and Astrid clung to that now. She spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. "We've all got less than we'd like, but we've got each other. That's worth more than a full storehouse." The women nodded, some reluctantly, and the tension eased, if only for a moment. Sigrid passed around a loaf of her bread, its crust dark and chewy, and Ingrid sang a lullaby, her voice soft as snow. Astrid felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. But the day brought new challenges. As Astrid returned to her longhouse, she found the door ajar, snow drifting across the threshold. Her heart quickened. She closed it tightly before leaving. Inside, the fire still burned, but a sack of barley lay tipped over a small pile. It spilled on the floor. Ira and Leaf sat wide-eyed, clutching each other. "A dog," Ira whispered, pointing to muddy paw prints. Astrid cursed under her breath, her mind racing. A stray dog could ruin their stores, and they could ill afford the loss. She grabbed a broom, shooing the unseen intruder, and swept the spilled grain back into the sack, salvaging what she could. Her hands shook, not from cold but from the fear of how close they'd come to losing more. She calmed the children, promising a story later, and set to work securing the longhouse. She stuffed rags into the gaps around the door, her fingers stiff with cold, and checked the stores again, counting every handful of grain. The incident was small, but it felt like a warning, a reminder of how fragile their survival was. She thought of the grove, the star she'd seen, the prayer to Freya. Had the gods sent the dog as a test, or was it just the world, indifferent and cruel? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand, the weight of her responsibility grounding her. The afternoon brought a rare break in the snow, and Astrid took the children to the yard, where the women were clearing paths again. Sigrid was there, her axe swinging as she broke up a fallen branch for firewood. Ingrid joined them, her baby asleep in a sling, and even Freydis came, her silence less sharp now. They worked together, their shovels and hands moving in rhythm, the snow piling high around them. Astrid felt the strength of their shared labor, the way it bound them despite their differences. She caught Freydis's eye and offered a small smile, which was returned, tentative but real. It was a start. Back in the longhouse, Astrid prepared a meal of boiled fish and turnips, the scent filling the air with a faint warmth. She told Ira and Leaf a story as they ate, her voice weaving a tale of a woman who tamed a wolf with kindness, turning it into a guardian of her home. The children listened, their eyes bright, and Astrid felt a surge of love for them, for this life she was fighting to protect. But as night fell, the tension from the morning returned. Freydis's words at the gathering echoed in her mind, sharp remarks about who deserved what, who worked harder. Astrid knew Freydis's bitterness came from fear, from a storehouse emptier than most, but it stung all the same. She sat by the fire, mending a pair of Leif's trousers, her needle moving with care. The wind outside was softer now, a low hum that seemed to carry the village's pulse. Astrid thought of the women's Sigrid's strength, Ingrid's quiet resilience. Even Freydis's sharp edges on felt a mix of gratitude and unease. They were her allies, her family, but winter could turn even friends into rivals. She prayed to Freya for unity, for the strength to hold them together. But the god's silence weighed heavy as she lay down beside her children, their warmth a steady comfort. Astrid's thoughts turned to Bjorn. Was he safe? Did he think of her as she thought of him? The village heart beat on, but its rhythm was fragile, tested by cold and scarcity. Tomorrow she would face new challenges, new threats, but for now she held her children close. The fire's glow a promise of endurance, the bonds of Hafenfell hold, but danger looms on the horizon. In the next chapter, we'll walk with Astrid as the shadow of rival raiders threatens the village, forcing her to protect her home and confront the fear that grips her heart. Stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story grows darker. The forgotten struggles of a Viking warrior's wife. Tales for Twilight Chapter 6. The shadow of raiders. The hearth in Astrid's longhouse burns low, its embers casting a faint glow against the walls of Hafenfell where winter holds the village in its icy grip. We left Astrid amidst the women of her community, their shared labor and fragile bonds a lifeline against the cold and scarcity. But the unity she clings to is tested not only by hunger and doubt but by whispers of danger from beyond the fjord. Tonight, the specter of rival raiders looms, threatening the fragile peace of the village and forcing Astrid to protect her home and children in ways she never imagined. So, pull your blanket close, let the fire's soft crackle guide you, and step with us into Astrid's world, where fear and courage collide under the shadow of an unseen enemy. The wind carried a new edge as it swept through Hafenfell, a sharp bite that seemed to whisper of trouble. Astrid woke to the sound of it rattling the shutters, the longhouse cold despite the furs piled high on her bed. The air smelled of frost and the faint temps of smoke, a reminder of the fire she'd tended late into the night. Ira and Leif slept soundly, their small forms curled together, but Astrid's mind was restless. The village had been abuzz with rumors for days, tales of tracks in the snow beyond the palisade, of strange fires glimpsed on distant hills. Raiders, the women whispered, clans from the north who struck when villages were weakest, their men away on their own quests for glory. Astrid rose, her breath visible in the dim light, and stoked the hearth, coaxing flames from the embers. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill as she prepared for the day. She checked the door, still secure after the dog's intrusion, and ran her fingers over the latch, ensuring it held firm. The memory of the spilled barley lingered, a small loss that felt like a warning. She couldn't afford another mistake, not with the stores dwindling and the winter stretching endlessly ahead. She glanced at the children, their faces peaceful, and felt a surge of resolve. Whatever came, she would protect them. Outside, the village was hushed, the snow falling in soft, relentless flakes. Astrid bundled herself in a cloak and trudged to the goat shed, her boots sinking into the drifts. The goats bleated, their breath steaming, and she fed them sparingly. Her hands trembling from cold and something else, fear, sharp and unfamiliar. She scanned the horizon, where the fjord met the sky, half expecting to see the dark shape of a ship cutting through the mist. There was nothing, only the gray expanse of ice and snow, but the unease stayed with her, heavy as the axe she carried. Back to the longhouse. The rumors grew louder at the women's gathering that morning. They met in Ingrid's longhouse, the air thick with the scent of boiling oats and the murmur of worried voices. Sigrid was there, her axe resting against her knee, her eyes scanning the room as if danger might slip through the walls. Ingrid rocked her baby, her face pale, while Freydis sat in the corner, her hands busy with a needle but her expression tight. "They say it's the Iron Wolves," Sigrid said, her voice low. "Raiders from the northern valleys. They hit Skjern last. Winter took everything, grain, livestock, even the women." The words hung heavy, and Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She thought of Bjorn, out there on the sea, unaware of the danger creeping toward their home. The men had taken most of the village's weapons, axes, spears, shields, leaving only a few old blades and tools. Astrid's own axe, a gift from her father, was sharp but small, meant for chopping wood, not fighting men. She listened as the women debated, their voices rising and falling. Sigrid wanted to set traps around the palisade, spikes hidden in the snow. Ingrid suggested hiding their stores in case raiders came. Freydis, her voice sharp, argued they should flee to the hills if the worst happened. Astrid stayed quiet, her mind racing. Fleeing meant abandoning the longhouse, their food, their lives. Staying meant facing blades with little more than courage. She spoke at last, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. We can't run. This is our home. We'll strengthen the palisade, set watches, and keep our fires low at night." The women nodded, some reluctantly, and Astrid felt the weight of their trust settle on her shoulders. She thought of her mother, who had faced raiders once, her hands steady as she barred the door and prayed. Astrid would do the same, but the thought of her children facing such danger made her stomach twist. The day was spent preparing. Astrid joined Sigrid and others at the palisade, reinforcing it with logs and stones, their hands raw from the cold. The work was grueling, the snow heavy, but it gave her purpose, a way to channel her fear. She taught Ira and Leif to stay quiet, to hide under the firs if she gave the signal. Like a game, she told them, forcing a smile, though her heart ached at their wide, trusting eyes. She sharpened her axe, its edge glinting in the firelight, and placed it near the door, within easy reach. The longhouse, once a haven, now felt like a fortress under siege. Night brought a tense quiet. Astrid sat by the hearth, the children asleep, her ears straining for any sound beyond the wind. The village was dark, the women agreeing to douse their fires early to avoid drawing attention. She wrapped her fingers around a small charm, a wooden pendant carved with Freya's rune, a gift from Bjorn before he left. She whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible. "Freya, shield us. Thor, lend your thunder." The words felt fragile, but they were all she had. She thought of the star she'd seen in the grove, its light a faint hope. But the memory of her dream, the sinking ship, clung to her, heavy as the snow outside. The next morning, Astrid woke to a cry from the yard. She grabbed her axe, her heart pounding, and rushed outside, the cold biting her face. It was Sigrid, standing at the palisade, pointing to tracks in the snow deep, deliberate, leading toward the woods. "Men," Sigrid said, her voice tight. "Not ours." Astrid's breath caught as she followed the tracks, her eyes scanning the trees. The prints were fresh, too large for animals, and they circled the village, as if testing its defenses. The women gathered, their faces pale, and Astrid felt their fear mirror her own. "We double the watch," she said, her voice firm. "No one goes out alone." The day passed in a blur of vigilance. Astrid took turns standing watch with Sigrid, their cloaks blending into the snow as they scanned the horizon. The fjord was still, the hills silent, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. She thought of Bjorn, his strength, his laughter, and wished he were here, not for his axe but for the way he made her feel safe. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the weight of her own axe, the warmth of her children waiting at home. She would be their shield, their strength, no matter what came. As night fell, the women gathered again, their voices low, their hands busy with tasks to keep fear at bay. Astrid told a story to Ira and Leif, her voice soft, about a woman who faced a pack of wolves and turned them away with a song. The children listened, their eyes wide, and she held them close, their warmth a reminder of why she fought. But as she lay down, the axe by her side, the tracks in the snow haunted her. Were the raiders watching, waiting for the right moment? She prayed to Freya, her fingers clutching the pendant, and closed her eyes, the wind's low moan her only answer. The shadow of danger grows closer, but Astrid's resolve holds firm. In the next chapter we'll walk with her as a mother, teaching her children resilience while grappling with her own fears, as the winter and the threat of raiders test her heart. Stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story endures. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 7. A Mother's Burden. The wind howls softly around Astrid's longhouse, carrying the weight of winter and the shadow of unseen raiders. The hearth's embers glow faintly, a fragile warmth in the heart of Hrafnfell, where the village holds its breath against the threat circling beyond the palisade. We left Astrid standing watch, her axe close, her heart steeled against the fear of rival clans. But now, her focus turns inward, to the two souls who anchor her world, her children, Ira and Leif. As the cold bites deeper and danger looms, Astrid must teach them resilience, weaving lessons of strength and survival into their young lives, all while carrying the weight of her own fears. So, pull your blanket close, let the fire's gentle crackle guide you, and step with us into Astrid's world, where a mother's love becomes her greatest shield. The dawn broke gray and heavy, the sky a blanket of clouds that promised more snow. Astrid woke to the sound of Leif's soft whimper, his small body curled against Ira's on their pallet. The longhouse was cold, the air sharp with the scent of frost and fading smoke. She rose, her joints aching from nights spent alert, and stirred the hearth, coaxing flames from the embers. The fire's warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill as she glanced at her children. Their faces pale but peaceful in sleep. They were her heart, her purpose, but also her vulnerability, a truth that weighed heavier with each passing day. She knelt beside them, brushing a lock of hair from Ira's forehead. At 8 winters, Ira was old enough to sense the tension. In the village, her bright eyes catching the worry Astrid tried to hide. Leif, only 6, was less aware, his world still bounded by wooden horses and stories of heroes. But even he felt the change, clinging closer to her, his questions about Bjorn sharper now. Will Papa be back before the snow stops? he'd asked yesterday, his voice small. Astrid had smiled, promising tales of treasure, but her heart twisted. She couldn't shield them from the truth forever, not from winter, not from raiders, not from the uncertainty of their father's fate. The morning demanded work. As always, Astrid bundled the children in furs and led them outside, the snow crunching under their boots. The village was quiet, the palisade looming like a silent guardian. She checked the goat shed, her breath steaming as she scattered grain for Stubborn, Whiteear and Little Horn. The goat's milk was thinner now, but she milked them carefully, saving every drop for her children. Ira watched her small hands mimicking Astrid's movements, eager to learn. "You're quick," Astrid said, her voice warm. "Soon you'll be faster than me," Ira beamed, and for a moment, the weight of the world lifted back in the longhouse. Astrid set the children to tasks, teaching them as her mother had taught her. She showed Ira how to grind barley, guiding her hands on the quern. The stones scrape a steady rhythm. "Press hard, but steady," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is how we keep the fire in our bellies." Leaf, too young for such work, sorted sticks for kindling, his small fingers clumsy but determined. Astrid watched them, her heart swelling with pride and fear. They were so young, yet winter spared no one, and she needed them to be ready, just for today, but for the days she couldn't foresee. The rumors of raiders hung over the village like a storm cloud. Astrid had seen the tracks again, closer now, circling the palisade. She kept her axe sharp, its handle worn smooth by her grip, and taught Ira and Leaf to listen for her signaler, sharp whistle that meant hide, stay quiet, don't move. "It's like a game," she told them, her smile masking the fear in her chest. "You hide, and I find you." Leaf giggled, but Ira's eyes were serious, understanding more than Astrid wished. She hated putting this burden on them, but survival demanded it. The women gathered at midday, their breath steaming in Sigrid's longhouse. The air smelled of boiled roots and damp wool, a faint comfort against the cold. Sigrid was sharpening a knife, her movements precise, while Ingrid rocked her baby, humming softly. Freydis sat apart, her silence less sharp but still heavy. Astrid shared a small loaf of flatbread, its crust tough but welcome, and listened as the women spoke of the raiders. "They'll come at night," Sigrid said, her voice low. "When the fires are low." Ingrid clutched her baby tighter, and Astrid felt the same fear tighten her own chest. She thought of Ira and Leaf, alone in the longhouse if raiders struck, and pushed the image away. She turned the conversation to the children, hoping to ease the tension. "Ira's learning to grind barley," she said, her voice warm. "She's strong like her father." The women smiled, sharing stories of their own children, Ingrid's baby grabbing at her hair, Sigrid's son carving his first rune. But the talk circled back to survival, to the stores that dwindled with each meal. Astrid offered a trick her mother had taught, mixing ground bark with flour to stretch the bread, and the women nodded, grateful but weary. Freydis spoke at last, her voice sharp. "We can't all be as clever as you, Astrid." The words stung, but Astrid met her gaze, offering a small smile. "We learn from each other," she said, and Freydis looked away, her expression softening. Back home, Astrid taught the children more, her voice a steady thread weaving lessons into their lives. She showed Ira how to mend a tear in Leaf's tunic, guiding her needle through the wool. "Small stitches," she said, "like the steps of a mouse." Leaf watched, his wooden horse galloping across the floor, and Astrid pulled him close, teaching him to tie a knot that wouldn't slip. "Strong, like you," she said, ruffling his hair. Their laughter filled the longhouse, a fleeting warmth against the cold, but Astrid's heart was heavy. She was teaching them to survive, to carry on if she couldn't, and the thought was a knife in her chest. Night fell, and the village grew quiet. The fires doused to avoid drawing eyes. Astrid sat by the hearth, her axe within reach, her ears straining for any sound beyond the wind. She told the children a story, her voice low and soothing, about a mother who built a boat from starlight to find her lost love. Ira listened, her eyes heavy, while Leaf curled against her, his wooden horse clutched tight. The tale was for them, but also for her, a reminder of the strength she drew from love. But as the fire burned low, her thoughts turned to the raiders, to the tracks in the snow, to the fragility of her world. She checked the door, the latch firm, and tucked the children under their furs. Their warmth a steady anchor, she thought, of Bjorn, out there on the sea, and wondered if he felt her prayers, her fear, her love. The pendant of Freya hung heavy around her neck, its rune a silent promise. She whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible. "Freya, guard my children. Thor, lend me your hammer." The wind answered, a soft moan that seemed to carry the god's silence as she lay down. The longhouse creaked under the snow's weight, and Astrid's mind raced. She was their mother, their shield, but the burden was heavy, and doubt crept in. Could she protect them from raiders, from hunger, from the winter's endless cold? She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on Ira's steady breathing, Leaf's small hand in hers. Tomorrow she would rise again, teach them, love them, fight for them. For now, she held them close. The fire's glow a fragile hope in the dark. The weight of a mother's love carries Astrid forward, but the winter's trials are far from over. In the next chapter we'll walk with her as spring's first signs stir hope but new hardships test her endurance, and the weight for Bjorn grows heavier. Stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story unfolds. The forgotten struggles of a Viking warrior's wife. Tales for Twilight. Chapter 8. The return of spring. The embers in Astrid's hearth glow faintly, casting shadows across the longhouse as winter clings to Hafenfall like a stubborn guest. We left Astrid cradling her children, Ira and Leif, teaching them resilience while carrying the weight of a mother's love against the looming threat of raiders. The village holds its breath, the palisade a fragile barrier. But now a faint shift stirs, a whisper of spring, a promise of warmth, yet with it comes new challenges. As Astrid prepares for Bjorn's possible return while grappling with the toll of the long winter. So, wrap your blanket tight, let the fire's soft crackle guide you, and step into Astrid's world, where hope and hardship walk hand in hand. The first sign of spring came not as a burst of warmth but as a softening of the air. A damp scent, of thawing earth. Astrid woke to dripping water, snow melting from the longhouse roof, each drop a quiet promise. The fjord, still rimmed with ice, gleamed under a gray sky, clouds parting for a sliver of pale sunlight. She stood at the door, her breath no longer clouding, and felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a new shoot. But winter's grip lingered, and her Hafenfall was weary, its people worn by cold and fear. Inside, Ira and Leif stirred, their faces flushed. Under firs Astrid knelt, brushing hair from Ira's cheek. "The snow's melting," she said, her voice warm. "Soon the fjord will sing again." Leif's eyes brightened, but Ira's gaze was steady, sensing the weight behind her words. Astrid smiled, hiding her ache. Spring meant hope, but also preparing for Bjorn's return or the chance he might not come. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the day's tasks. The longhouse smelled of smoke and damp wool, the fire burning low to save wood. Astrid stoked it, flames casting a glow on the tapestries. She checked the stores, fingers tracing near empty sacks of barley and fish. Winter had been merciless, and the threat of raiders kept her vigilant. She bundled the children in cloaks and led them outside, boots crunching on softening snow. The village was stirring, paths slick with meltwater, the air alive with the scent of pine and earth. At the goat shed, Astrid fed stubborn Whiteear and Little Horn, their milk thin but precious. Ira helped, her hands steady, while Leif scattered straw, giggling as a goat nudged him. "They're hungry like us," Ira said, and Astrid nodded, her heart tight. She taught them to check the traps, showing Ira how to spot tracks in the slush. They found a rabbit, its fur damp, and Astrid skinned it later, her knife swift, adding it to a thin stew with turnips and herbs. The children ate eagerly, their spoons scraping wooden bowls, and Astrid watched, her own portion small. The women gathered at Sigrid's longhouse, the air thick with the scent of boiling oats. Sigrid sharpened a blade, her eyes scanning the room, while Ingrid rocked her baby, humming softly. Freydis, less sharp now, shared a loaf of tough bread. Talk turned to spring planting, fishing, the hope of Bjorn and the men returning. But the raider tracks lingered in their minds. "They haven't struck yet," Sigrid said, her voice low, "but they're watching." Astrid felt a chill, her hand brushing the Freya pendant at her neck. She suggested reinforcing the palisade again, and the women agreed, their hands soon busy with logs and stones. Back home, Astrid taught Ira to weave, guiding her fingers through the loom's threads. "Slow and steady," she said, "like the river finding its way." Leif watched, carving a stick into a rough ship, his tongue poking out in focus. Astrid smiled, but her thoughts were on the fjord, on ships that might or might not return. She told them a story by the fire, her voice soft, about a woman who wove a sail from moonlight to guide her love home. The children listened, eyes heavy, and Astrid held them close, their warmth easing her fear. The village buzzed with spring's preparations. Astrid joined the women to clear slush from paths, their shovels scraping against earth. She traded a woven belt for a small sack of oats from Ingrid, their smiles a quiet bond. But tension lingered. Freydis's sharp glance when food was mentioned, Sigrid's clipped words about shared work. Astrid smoothed it over, her voice calm. "We'll plant together, share the harvest." They nodded, but the strain of winter's losses hung heavy. If you're finding hope in Astrid's tale, subscribe if you like the video. Your support keeps these stories glowing like a spring dawn one afternoon. Astrid took the children to the fjord's edge, the ice cracking under the sun's weak warmth. She showed them how to mend nets, her hands deft despite the chill. Ira copied her, her knots clumsy but earnest, while Leif splashed in the shallows, laughing. Astrid watched, her heart swelling, but the horizon drew her gaze. Was Bjorn out there, his ship cutting through waves? Or had the sea claimed him, as it had her father? She clutched Freya's pendant, whispering a prayer for his safety, for the strength to face what came. The day brought a new challenger. Goat Whiteear fell ill, her milk drying up. Astrid tended her, mixing herbs into her feed, her hands gentle but her mind racing. Losing a goat could mean hunger, especially with stores so low. She hid her worry from the children, telling them Whiteear was just tired, but Iris' knowing look pierced her. That night, Astrid sat by the hearth mending a net, the repetitive motion a quiet anchor. The wind was softer now, carrying the scent of wet earth, but the threat of raiders lingered, their tracks a silent menace. She checked the palisade before bed, her axe heavy in her hand. The village was quiet, the stars bright above. She thought of the star she'd seen in the grove, its light a faint hope. Was it Freya's answer or just a trick of the night? She prayed again, her voice a whisper. Freya, guide him home. Thor, guard our heart. The god's silence was heavy, but Astrid's resolve was not. She returned to the longhouse, tucking Ira and Leaf under furs, their warmth her strength as she lay down. The drip of meltwater lulled her, a reminder of spring's approach, but the weight of waiting for Bjorn, for safety, for an end to hardship rest on her. Tomorrow, she would rise, tend the goats, teach her children, and watch the horizon. For now, she held her family close. The fire's glow, a fragile promise of better days. Spring stirs, but Astrid's vigil continues. In the next chapter, we'll walk with her as rumors of the men's fate reach Hrafnfell, stirring hope and dread. As she faces the sea's uncertain answer, stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story unfolds. If you've been moved by Astrid's endurance, subscribe if you liked the video. Join us to keep our tale burning bright. The forgotten struggles of a Viking warrior's wife. Tales for Twilight Chapter 9 echoes from the Seatha hearth in Astrid's longhouse flickers. Its warmth, a quiet defiance against the fading chill of Hrafnfell's winter. We left her amidst the first stirrings of spring, tending her children and goats, her heart buoyed by the promise of thawing earth but heavy with the weight for Bjorn's return. The village pulses with cautious hope, the fjord's ice cracking under the sun's weak light, but the shadow of raiders still lingers, and now, whispers of news from the sea ripple through the community. Tonight, we walk with Astrid as she faces rumors of her husband's fate, her soul caught between hope and dread, the weight of the unknown pressing harder than ever. So, wrap your blanket close, let the fire's gentle crackle guide you, and step into Astrid's world, where the sea's echoes carry both dreams and fears. The morning dawned with a fragile warmth, the air soft with the scent of wet earth and budding pines. Astrid woke to the sound of dripping meltwater, a steady rhythm that marked the slow retreat of winter. The longhouse was quieter now, the wind no longer howling but murmuring, as if sharing secrets with the fjord. She rose, her body stiff from sleepless nights, and stoked the hearth, the flames casting a golden glow across the worn tapestries. Ira and Leaf slept on their pallet, their small forms tangled in furs, and Astrid paused to watch them, her heart a mix of love and fear. Spring was here, but it brought no certainty, only the hope of Bjorn's return and the lingering threat of raiders. She stepped outside, the snow slushy under her boots, and breathed in the changing air. The fjord gleamed, its ice thinning, reflecting a sky streaked with pale light. The village of Hrafnfell was stirring, the paths slick with mud, the longhouses steaming as snow melted from their roofs. Astrid headed to the goat shed, her cloak damp with mist, and fed stubborn Whitehair and Littlehorn. Whitehair was recovering, her milk returning, and Astrid murmured thanks to Freya, her fingers brushing the pendant at her neck. The small victory lifted her spirits, but the horizon drew her gaze. The fjord's expanse a silent question. Where was Bjorn? The rumor came at midday, carried by a trader's skiff that slipped into the fjord, its sails tattered but proud. Astrid was in the yard, helping Sigrid mend a fishing net, when the shout went up, news from the sea. The women dropped their work, their faces a mix of hope and dread, and gathered at the shore. The trader, a wiry man named Hakon, stood by his boat, his beard flecked with salt. Ships from the south, he said, his voice rough. Some returned to Vargfjell with silver, others lost to a storm off the black cliffs. Astrid's heart clenched, her hand tightening on IRAs who had run to her side. Vargfjell was near Bjorn's path, but the storm-heard dream of the sinking ship flashed in her mind. Sharp and cold, the women pressed Hakon for details, their voices overlapping. Was it Bjorn's ship Torvald's? Sigrid demanded her, eyes fierce. Hakon shook his head, his hands raised. I know only what I heard. Some ships made it, some didn't. The sea's a cruel mistress. Astrid felt Ira's grip tighten, and she knelt, pulling both children close. Papa's strong, she whispered, her voice steady for them. He knows the sea. But inside, doubt gnawed, a shadow that grew with every vague word from her lips. Back in the longhouse, Astrid busied herself to quiet her thoughts. She ground barley, the quern scrape a familiar anchor, and prepared a thin stew, its scent of fish and herbs filling the air. Ira helped her small hand steady, while Leaf played nearby, his wooden ship sailing across the floor. Will Papa bring the pearl? He asked, his voice bright. Astrid smiled, her throat tight. He'll bring stories, she said, and maybe a comb for my hair. The words were a prayer as much as a promise, a hope she clung to despite the trader's news. The village buzzed with the rumor, the women gathering in Ingrid's longhouse, their voices low but urgent. Sigrid paced, her hands clenched, while Ingrid rocked her baby, her face pale. Freya's quieter now, shared a small loaf, her earlier sharpness dulled by shared fear. If they're lost, Ingrid whispered, what becomes of us? Astrid felt the question like a blade, but she spoke, her voice calm. We endure, we always have. The women nodded, their eyes meeting hers, and she felt their trust, heavy but grounding. They were a village of women, bound by survival, and she would not let them falter. If you're finding hope in Astrid's strength, subscribe if you like the video. Your support keeps these tales burning like a beacon in the fog. The day wore on. The village caught in a tense rhythm of work and waiting. Astrid took Ira and Leif to the fjord's edge, teaching them to spot the first signs of fish returning with the thaw. The water lapped softly, its surface broken by cracks in the ice, and Astrid showed Ira how to set a net, her hands guiding the knots. Leif splashed in the shallows, laughing, and Astrid watched, her heart torn between their joy and the weight of Hakon's words. She scanned the horizon, half expecting a sail, but saw only the endless gray of sea and sky. That night she sat by the hearth, mending a cloak, her needle moving with slow precision. The fire's glow danced across the longhouse, casting shadows that seemed to shift with her thoughts. The children slept, their breathing a soft counterpoint to the drip of meltwater outside. Astrid thought of Bjorn, his crooked smile, his promises of silver and combs. Was he safe, celebrating a successful raid, or was he lost, his ship swallowed by the storm Hakon spoke of? She clutched Freya's pendant, its rune warm against her skin, and whispered a prayer. Freya, guide him. Thor, shield him. God's silence was heavy, but she held to hope, frail as the spring's first light. The village women met again, their hands busy with tasks, spinning, weaving, sharpening tools. Astrid shared a trick for stretching fish broth, adding ground seeds to thicken it, and the women listened, their faces weary but grateful. Freyta spoke up, her voice softer now. You're good at this, Astrid, keeping us steady. The words were a rare kindness, and Astrid nodded, her throat tight. But the rumor of the storm lingered, a shadow over their work, and Astrid felt the weight of their shared fear. As night deepened, Astrid checked the palisade, her axe in hand, the radar tracks still fresh in her mind. The village was quiet, the stars bright above the fjord. She thought of the star she'd seen in the grove, its light a faint echo of hope. Was Bjorn out there, his ship cutting through waves, or had the sea claimed him, as it had so many before? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the tasks ahead, planting, fishing, protecting her children. She returned to the longhouse, tucking Ira and Leif under their furs. Their warmth, her anchored at the drip of meltwater, lulled her as she lay down, the fire's glow a fragile promise. Spring was here, but the weight for Bjorn was heavier than ever, the sea's echoes both a hope and a fear. Tomorrow, she would rise, tend the hearth, and face whatever came. Her love for her children and her village her greatest strength. The sea's whispers grow louder, and Astrid's heart hangs in the balance. In the next chapter, we'll walk with her as she faces the culmination of her journey, reflecting on her strength and the legacy she's built in the face of winter's trials. Stay with us, friends, as Astrid's story draws to a close. If you've been moved by Astrid's endurance, subscribe if you liked the video. Join us to keep her tale burning bright. The Forgotten Struggles of a Viking Warrior's Wife, Tales for Twilight, Chapter 10. The fire endures. The hearth in Astrid's longhouse burned steadily now, its flames a quiet testament to her resilience as Hrafnfell feels the first breath of spring. We left her standing by the fjord, her heart caught between hope and dread as rumors of lost ships and distant storms stirred the village. The ice is melting, the air softening, but the weight for Bjorn's return weighs heavy, mingling with the ever-present threat of raiders. Tonight, we walk with Astrid as she reflects on her journey, weaving together the threads of survival, love, and strength that have carried her through the winter. Her story is not just hers but that of countless women whose fires burned bright in the shadows of history. So, pull your blanket close, let the fire's gentle crackle guide you, and step into Astrid's world one final time, where the legacy of her endurance shines like a beacon. The dawn broke with a warmth that felt almost foreign, the sun climbing higher than it had in months, its light spilling across the fjord in a golden haze. Astrid woke to the sound of birds' tentative chirps that pierced the quiet of Hrafnfell. The longhouse smelled of damp earth and fading smoke, the air softer now, carrying the promise of spring. She rose, her body weary but her spirit steady, and stoked the hearth, the flames casting a warm glow across the tapestries that told stories of gods and ships. Ira and Leif slept on their pallet, their faces peaceful, and Astrid paused, her heart swelling with love. They were her reason, her fire, and she had carried them through the winter's darkest days. Outside, the village was alive with the hum of spring. The snow had retreated to patches, revealing muddy paths and the first green sprigs pushing through the earth. Astrid stepped into the yard, her boots sinking into the soft ground, and breathed in the scent of pine and thaw. The fjord sparkled, its ice reduced to thin sheets that cracked under the sun's touch. She headed to the goat shed, where stubborn Whiteear and Little Horn greeted her with eager bleats. Their milk was stronger now, a small miracle. and Astrid milked them carefully, her hand steady despite the ache of months spent fighting hunger and cold. The rumor of the storm still lingered, her Khan's words echoing in her mind. Some ships returned, others lost. Astrid had clung to hope, whispering prayers to Freya each night, her pendant a constant weight at her neck. But today, as she worked, a new sound reached her, a shout from the shore, sharp and urgent. Her heart leaped, and she grabbed her cloak, calling to Ira and Leif to stay close. The village was already moving, women and children streaming toward the fjord, their voices a mix of fear and anticipation. Astrid joined them, her hand gripping Ira's, Leif's small fingers in hers. As they reached the water's edge, a ship broke through the mist, its dragon-headed prow cutting the waves, sails patched but proud. Astrid's breath caught, her eyes scanning for Bjorn's broad figure. The women around her murmured Sigrid, her face taut with hope, Ingrid clutching her baby, Freydis, her usual sharpness softened by the moment. The ship drew closer, and Astrid saw him, Bjorn, standing at the helm, his beard flecked with salt, his crooked smile catching the light. Relief flooded her, warm as the spring sun, but it was tempered by the sight of the ship, smaller than it should have been, its crew fewer, their faces worn. The men disembarked, and Bjorn's arms found her, strong and warm, his laughter a sound she'd feared she'd never hear again. "I kept my promise," he said, pressing a small bone comb into her hand, its carvings intricate despite the wear of travel. Ira and Leif clung to him, their voices bright with questions, and Astrid watched, her heart full but heavy. Not all had returned. Torvald was among the missing, lost to the storm Hakon spoke of. Sigrid stood apart, her face a mask, and Astrid felt her grief like a stone in her chest. Back in the longhouse, the air was alive with Bjorn's presence. He sat by the hearth, Ira and Leif at his feet, telling tales of distant shores, of silver won and battles fought. The children listened, wide-eyed as he spoke of a storm that nearly claimed them, of waves that roared like giants. Astrid listened too, her hands busy with a spindle, the wool twisting into thread. His voice was a comfort, but his words stirred the fears she'd carried all winter, the dream of the sinking ship, the raven's cry, the tracks in the snow. She had faced them alone, her strength forged in the quiet moments of survival. You're finding solace in Astrid's journey. Subscribe if you like the video. Your support keeps these stories glowing like a hearth in spring. The village gathered that night, a feast to welcome the men. Though the food was simple fish, flatbread, the last of the winter's stores, Astrid sat with Bjorn, her hand in his, and felt the warmth of the community around her. Sigrid was quieter, her eyes distant, but she joined them, her strength a mirror of Astrid's own. Ingrid sang, her voice soft, while Freydis shared a rare smile, her bitterness eased by the return of some. Astrid looked at them, these women who had been her allies, her rivals, her family, and felt a deep gratitude. They had endured together, their hands and hearts weaving a tapestry stronger than any storm. As the days passed, Astrid settled into a new rhythm. She planted seeds with Ira, teaching her to press them into the soft earth, while Leif followed Bjorn, his wooden ship replaced by a real one he carved under his father's guidance. The fjord was alive now, fish returning, and Astrid mended nets, her fingers deft despite the months of cold. The threat of raiders had faded, no new tracks appeared, and the village's vigilance held. But Astrid knew that danger could return, just as winter would. She taught Ira and Leif to watch, to listen, to be ready. Her lessons a legacy of resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the fjord in hues of gold and pink, Astrid sat by the hearth, Bjorn beside her. The longhouse smelled of fresh bread and herbs, a warmth that felt like a gift. She thought of the winter, of the hunger, the fear, the prayers to Freya that had carried her through. She thought of her mother, her grandmother, the women before her who had faced the same trials, their stories woven into the tapestries on her walls. Their strength lived in her, in the hands that ground barley, mended cloaks, held her children. Close she looked at Bjorn, his face softened by the firelight, and felt a quiet pride. She had kept their home, their family, their fire burning. "You're stronger than any warrior," he said, his voice low, and she smiled, her heart full. The comb he'd brought her rested on the altar, beside Freya's figure, a small token of a promise kept. She thought of the star in the grove, the omens that had haunted her, and realized they were just threads in a larger story, one of endurance, of love, of a woman's quiet power. If you've been moved by Astrid's tale, subscribe if you liked the video. Join us to keep her legacy burning bright. As night fell, Astrid lay beside her children, Bjorn's warmth beside her, the fire's glow a steady light. The fjord sang outside, its waves a soft lullaby, and she felt the weight of winter lift. At last she had faced hunger, fear, and the sea's uncertainty, and she had endured. Her story was not just hers but belonged to every woman who had kept the hearth alive, whose strength held villages together when the world turned cold. She closed her eyes, the crackle of the fire blending with the fjord's song, and knew that, whatever came next, her fire would endure. Astrid's journey has reached its end, but her legacy echoes through time, a testament to the women whose strength shaped the past. Thank you for walking with us, friends, through her tale of resilience and love.